More than 3,000 flood-affected Brisbane streets are waiting for curbside collection a week after floods rushed through southeast Queensland. Key points. Council has temporary tip sites across the city where trucks dump waste rather than travelling to transfer centres with each load. Council has temporary tip sites across the city where trucks dump waste rather than travelling to transfer centres with each load. The Lord Mayor said in excess of 3,000 streets across Brisbane needed curbside collection. The Lord Mayor said in excess of 3,000 streets across Brisbane needed curbside collection. He said standing down the mud army removed a liability risk for council and a safety risk for its volunteers. Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner said the City Council has received an advance payment of $10 million from the Queensland Reconstruction Authority to help with the cleanup, which he said was likely to run into the tens of millions. There is in excess of 3,000 streets across Brisbane that need to be cleaned up from a curbside collection point of view, and that number continues to grow, Mr. Schrinner said. The Lord Mayor said the time frame for flooded streets to be visited by Council's curbside collection teams continued to evolve, as Council teams had to revisit streets multiple times while residents continued clearing out damaged homes. In some areas we'll need to do several passes, and we're willing to do that. We'll just keep this curbside collection going until it's all gone, he said. Some residents on the north side have been waiting up to a week for flood-damaged waste to be removed, Labor councillor Jared Cassidy says. To speed up the process, the council has allocated temporary tip sites across the city where trucks can dump the waste, rather than travelling to one of the waste transfer centres with each load. Larger trucks are then collecting the waste from the centralised dump spots and taking it in bulk to the waste centres. The council is also accepting help from private contractors. Mr. Schrinner said Defence Force numbers were also set to be doubled. There are about 1,378 personnel in Queensland, with the ADF's focus on Monday in the suburbs of Ashgrove, The Gap, and Redcliffe. The Defence Force helps clean up after flooding in Fairfield in Brisbane on Friday. Defending the Mud Army's conclusion. On Saturday, the council told its 15,000-strong volunteer Mud Army to stand down after a single day of cleanup, saying the ADF and council workers would take over. State opposition leader Jared Cassidy said many flood-affected suburbs on the north side had not seen any curbside collection more than a week after putting their damaged possessions out on the curb. It's now getting quite upsetting for people, because in large parts of Deagon for the last week we've seen the streets just strewn with people's possessions, Mr. Cassidy said. They are feeling a bit like they are being left behind, and I've been getting just as frustrated with the slow progress of the curbside pickup. Mr. Cassidy said council workers had slogged their guts out over 2 days just cleaning up a single street, and more than 200 streets in his north side ward were affected. At the rate they are currently going, it's going to take months and months and months, he said. Mr. Schrinner said there was a lot more work to be done, adding the council was methodically going through every request for help and confirming whether or not people still needed assistance. The volunteer Mud Army has a specific purpose, and that purpose was to go and knock on doors and help people in their homes, he said. Councillor Peter Matic, Annie Pope from the Barton Bowls Club, and Lord Mayor Adrian Schrinner at the Flooded Bowls Club on Friday. The Lord Mayor said there was also a liability risk for council and a safety risk for volunteers. There were situations where there was heavy machinery and trucks moving through streets cleaning up. There was debris moving around the place, he said. Having Mud Army volunteers walking right next to large excavators and trucks was a dangerous situation, and we needed to protect them from that. There's already been too many lives lost in this flooding disaster, and I don't want to see any more lost through those safety risks. Lynn says the Mud Army should not have been stood down. So much work to be done. Jason and Lynn's Rockley home was one of the few on their street that did not flood. They said not nearly enough volunteers from the 15,000-strong Mud Army had been deployed to Rockley. The people who did volunteer for the Mud Army, good on them, Jason said. Jason and Lynn from Rockley helped fellow Rockley residents evacuate, save household items in their kayak during the worst of the floods. When the Mud Army was stood down, Lynn and many others from the area questioned the decision and called for help on social media, prompting some volunteers to turn up unofficially. They definitely shouldn't have cancelled. They shouldn't have sent that message out to people telling them, "You're not needed the following day," Lynn said. "We still have so much work that needs to be done in this area." Complex needs. On the south side, Labour councillor Steve Griffiths said his community was working together to match volunteers with needed support across hard-hit suburbs such as Rockley and surrounds. But for some multicultural communities, language barriers, COVID-19 isolation requirements, and poverty were causing further challenges, Mr. Griffiths said. "We have one lady who was sleeping on a wet mattress. She just had nowhere to go," Mr. Griffiths said. "We had another house that are sleeping in wet conditions as well, but they are all locked down with COVID and from a multicultural community." Loading.